Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday, March the 24th, coming to you from Norfolk on the east coast of England, live with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7RP. Great to see you. On tonight's show, a special evening on Ofcom's forthcoming licence changes with EMF. We find out how DIY hairdressing can actually support local wildlife. And we find out who works from a shack like this. Now, we've only had one entry by email so far. So if you know whose the shack that is, or just give us a good guess, you can put it on Facebook or on BATC, and we will cover that in a few minutes' time when we get to that section. My clue, by the way, on the newsletter was if he had a shilling for every time someone said his name, he would be out of a job. So if you know, enter it on Facebook or on BATC now. But first, club news. And we start with very sad news because we understand from Tony G000R and Bill G4NRE that David G2FT from Chroma has gone silent key. Now, he wasn't a NARC member, but many of you I know will know him. So our sympathies go to his family and friends. From Malcolm G3PDH, tomorrow, Thursday the 25th of March, is an SSB session in the club championships. So far, NARC are in the lead in the local section, so we hope that as many members will participate as possible to ensure that we maintain our position. Any new members or newcomers or interested in contesting are welcome to join us, and if they require any assistance, to contact one of the contest team. There's a contest net held every Friday night at 9 o'clock on 145 250 MHz, specifically for the purposes of providing such assistance, so just call in. The contest rules and the details on the tables and results are in the links on our newsletter and on our website at the moment. And a timely reminder, literally, from GB2RS newsreader Mike G4DYC this afternoon, that the clocks go forward by 1 hour this Saturday overnight. So from Sunday, we'll be on British Summer Time, which is an hour later, so we lose that extra hour's sleep. And of course, the GB2RS news will be at 7 p.m, this time BST, British Summer Time, instead of GMT.
So we lose an hour on a Saturday night, so that's 1 hour less party time.
It is, I'm afraid, but we make it up in about 6 months. Though.
Okay, I'll have to wait till then.
Okay. Stuart G7KBF sent us this, which we thought might be interested to us, even though it's just over the channel in France. After an 8-year wait, a new amateur radio decree has been published in the French government's official journal. The most significant change involves the way amateur radio exams are graded. France has one amateur radio exam, which is equivalent to the European Conference of Postal and Telecommunication Administrators, or CEPT. And it's like all 3 UK exams combined. The French HAREC team, which stands for Harmonised Amateur Radio Examination Certificate, comprises just 40 questions to be completed in 45 minutes, with 15 minutes allowed for the 20 rules and regulations questions and 30 minutes for the 20 technical theory questions. Now, how these exams were graded was unusual, with 3 points given for a correct answer, but this is the different bit, 1 point is deducted for each wrong answer. Under the new rules regime, candidates will receive 1 point for a correct answer and no credit for wrong answers. So to pass, a candidate must get at least 50% of the questions correct in both the sections of the exam. And questions involving digital signal processing are also being added to the exam to bring it up to date. And some changes will be made relating to call signs, thanks to the French official journal and Southgate Amateur Radio News. And of course this, as you can see on your screen, from the ARRL. Now, we realise that occasionally we might influence people here, and last week I had a bit of a game to show you how I planned to cut Tammy's hair just as she cut mine. But we're a bit worried about the influence that this might have had on one of our members, because Peter M0VRA sent us this picture. And he says this: following 12 months following 12 months growth, Anne, who's his ex-YL, agreed to attempt a haircut. She'd practiced on Jaco, the Welsh Terrier, first. So let's have a look and see what's like.
Do you think he's celebrating Burns Night there?
Do you think so?
Yes, I do.
think so. I wonder if Ralph's watching. He'll put us right, won't he?
Yeah.
So let's see the before. This is the before, and what's happening on the after?
Oh, that looks a bit more like we think that Peter
Should we
looks
just
like.
explain? Peter's the one on the right. Okay. I think that's really sporting. Can we just go back and have a look? Oh, we can't do that, can we? Probably the way you arrange this. Oh, sorry, Tammy.
Yeah, we can.
There we go. One more look. Look at that. The famous grass whiskey's got there, and the Glenlivet.
Is that haggis?
I don't know what that thing is, really.
I should think it is. I just think
Yeah.
that is Band's night, so...
Okay, and then again, and
There
what
you
it
go.
looks like now. And this is the really important bit about wildlife. So rather than sell the thatch on eBay, we placed it outside in a wire cage, much to the delight of a jackdaw. So if you see a young jackdaw with dandruff, it may have come from Taverham. And apologies to Rabbi Burns, he says. There we go. You see, that's the sort of news we love to get from you. Thank you ever so much, Peter, for going to all that effort. Or maybe that is just the way you dress normally. I don't know.
Well, maybe. Maybe
possibly
it is.
Thanks a lot. It was
Yeah.
really good fun. It's just another reminder that Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, we've got an online AGM on the 14th of April after a mini version of this, the NARC Live. We did send a special email out. If you haven't had that yet, or maybe you don't sign up to emails, you can email me at the usual address to get a copy of that, if you're a member of the club, that is. And if you don't normally get the newsletter, then you can sign up for that on the front page of our website. So, Tammy, hang on a minute. Little people, I was going to say to you, but you've got something else in front of you.
Oh, actually, I've got two other things.
All right,
So,
okay. Over to you.
Right.
I shall have a rest and a drink.
Ken sent us this, and it just made me laugh because it made me think of you, actually. So I'll
Okay.
just show it. It says, I was born male, I identify as male, but according to Sainsbury's Deluxe Sticky Toffee Pudding, I'm actually a family of 4.
How dare you?
And that made me think of you with
Just
your
me.
lamb moussaka, because you do pig out a bit on lamb moussaka.
It's not for 4, but it is a meal for 2, I must
It
admit.
is,
'Cause
and
it's not enough.
pretty big, and it just made me think of
Are we
you.
going to go into all the personal
That's
details
quite
then? And
funny.
there's some bits of the moussaka I don't like. What is that thing called?
Aubergine.
I don't like that. So I picked that out. So there isn't as much food, you see. So that, anyway. Why do you share that?
Well, it made me, it tickled me, shall we say.
Good. Well,
So-
you know what you're opening up for more revenge attacks.
Yeah,
but anyway,
probably.
and what on earth have you got here?
Well, this is not going according to plan, currently.
Do you want to lift that up so that people at home can see?
I can.
Oh, it works.
It works. Okay. Because actually, did you know that NARC Live is 1 year old today? It is a whole year
Is
since
it
we
really?
did our first NARC Live. Yep.
Oh, wow.
So I
Okay.
thought it's appropriate to have cake. There is a flame there, but it's very faint.
Okay. Given what you just said to me, I mean, is that for 1 person, 2, 4, what?
Well, I'm sure we can eat that between us, can't we?
We'll celebrate.
With
all right.
with the we'll think of everybody while we eat it. So
All right.
do you want to blow it out? Don't spit on it because you might have corona. But
No. There we go.
excellent. Have we got
We're
a
going
fire
to smell
alarm
that
in
the
here?
rest of the night. Yes, we have, as
There
you
you go.
know. Oh, heavens.
Right, what's
Right,
next?
thank you very much for that. And thanks for staying with us
Yes.
for 52 weeks, for a year.
Yep.
Obviously, a lot of sad things have happened in the world in that 52 weeks, but we'd like to think that what we've done here brings a bit of sunshine, and no more sunshine than comes from you guys every week for letting us know. So thank you for that. Thanks for supporting us doing it. Right, Tammy.
Little people.
Little people.
Right, little people this week. This one, here we go.
Oh, this is topical.
This is called Extra Level. So if you can see in the middle, there's Mario. And if you've ever played Super Mario, you'll know that he goes along like the bricks and runs and jumps and has the coins. So they're thinking like the tracks and the solder joints on there are just like a Mario level, which looks pretty cool. But you don't game.
I don't
so
game,
you
do I?
wouldn't
No, this
really
is why,
know.
to me, you know what, this is really sad. Very sad. Because to me, when I saw that, I'm just looking at the number on that chip. I am. That's a regulator
dear.
chip, look, with the 5 legs.
If you say so.
I'm sorry. But then I see little Mario, top leftish, isn't it, of the screen.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's very clever stuff. Is it anybody else, or is it just me that just sees a printed circuit board with that?
Just you.
Lovely stuff.
Oh dear.
Anyway, if you want to see more of those pictures, as always, it's miniature-calendar.com. We're good to see them. Thank you very much, Tammy, for that. So what have you been doing? Not more haircuts, I hope, because we don't want to be held responsible. We're going to have to put one of those disclaimers at the bottom of the screen, you know, if we do that again.
My hair's getting longer every week. So.
Well, I offered. Anyway, do keep us in touch. It's lovely to hear from you, and I'm sure it brings a smile to everybody else as well. If you keep in touch, drop us an email to this address every week by 3 o'clock if you can on a Wednesday, and to be sure to get onto that show or one very soon afterwards. As you say, I've been doing this a year. Who'd have believed it?
Yep.
Now we're going on to that competition which we've been doing for a year. I really didn't think...
Actually, this is week 51 because we
51,
didn't start with the shack for the first week.
No, we thought of that in the week because we had more than 2 days to think about what we should do. Okay, well anyway, this is the shack from last week. So who works from a shack like this? Now let's have a look online. Has anybody given...
There was actually, I saw somewhere, it was... Steve G3EVA, when I can find it. Where is it? Steve G3EVA. Is it Bob's shack? But he hasn't put a call sign, so he's just gone
he's just
by
used
your
the clue, hasn't he? Well, yeah, the clue, remember, was about that pound. Oh, Sonny hates it when I explain a clue, so I'm not going to explain a clue. Anyway, no other guesses though. Well, all we did have was one email, one guess, and it was an email from Alan G800 who says this is Bob Fuller's G6 PWS shack in St Albans. Bob has cleared the workbench for this photo to be taken because it's normally full of repairs or projects. So Tammy, reveal all. Whose shack was this?
It was Bob, G6 PWS.
And you know what? I must admit, when Bob sent that picture to us some months ago now, he did say there's one person who'll definitely get it, and it was Alan. So he obviously knows his shack very well.
Yeah.
Anyway, as I have said many times, we really are. I think we've got 2 shacks left. So if you haven't sent your shack yet and you want to be part of this competition before we change it for something completely different, you need to send us your shack picture very, very soon. But we have a new shack for this week, and let's now have a look. I know you're busy there, Tams, because we were doing something later on and we're just changing a few things at the last moment. But anyway, let's have a look who works actually from a shack like this. Now, I know it's not a great quality picture, but that's because of the age of it. And in fact, the person who sent it said it came back from one of those quick print type people. Do you remember the true print type people who did that? But that was their shack. Now, can you identify it from any of those things? I'm not going to give you any clues now, but I might put a clue or two in the newsletter if I don't have any responses. Someone well known to us in our club. Have a look at that. That, as always, will be on our newsletter and on our website in the next couple of days. So you've got until next Wednesday at 3 o'clock to tell us who you think works from a shack like that. And I'll put a couple worked from a shack like that. And I'll put a couple of clues in there as well. Obviously, someone who builds stuff. Look at that on the bench. So anyway, just to let you know what's happening next week on the club, really. On Sunday, as Mike wrote to us, so remind you that GB2RS is the new service from the RSGB, and that's at 7 o'clock on repeater GB3NB this Sunday and every Sunday, 7 o'clock BST. On Monday, the 29th of March, we've got Steve, G3EVA. He hosts our Monday Night Net, and the subject this week is favourite comic books and comic book characters. So feel free to join in, and everybody, of course, is welcome. And at 8:30, there's an 80-metre CW net as well. Now, on next week, on Wednesday, the 31st of March, we have our monthly Getting to Know, where we get to know and interview someone who's been very much involved with the radio community. And next week, our guest is Peter Waters, G3OJV. Now, Peter Waters may not mean much to you, but his surname is very famous because he is the Waters of Waters and Stanton fame. And we're going to ask him lots of things. How did he get started in amateur radio? What does he think of the hobby right now? And I'm sure a question many of you have asked, why did he move his famous store from Hockley in Essex down to Portsmouth? Peter will be live, so as well as me asking some questions, you will be free to ask him questions as well. And that's Getting to Know on next week's NARC Live from 7:30 here on BATC or on Facebook. And of course, all your regular stories and everything else, all the stuff that you hopefully are going to send us between then, we will put on the programme as well. And don't forget, of course, our NARC Live card, which we send that to anybody who you think could be cheered up, maybe celebrating an anniversary or something. Just drop me a line with an email, with the address, and the reason why, and we will add your name to ours, sign it and send it off. It doesn't matter where they are in the world as well, and it really can cheer some people up. So we'll be very happy to do that for us. And you can find out more details about our club as well by looking at our website, if you've just joined us for the first time in particular, and that's at www.norfolkamateurradio.org. So, we're on to tonight's main event. Now, firstly, I'd just like to introduce you the other three people who will be doing this with this evening. So let's go and meet them. If we can have a look at those, Tammy. I'm sorry, I know you're really busy with him. We've got Steve, G0KY, in the top right there. We've got Mike, G8EEY. I should explain, Mike is one of our EMC officers. And bottom right there is Tony, G0MQG, and he's also one of our EMC officers. We've got Steve, because tonight, as you know, we're talking about ICNIRP, as it's called, or EMF, and Steve's got a very broad knowledge of aerials and antennas, which is half the battle, I think, with that. So hopefully we're going to have a lot of interest tonight. We have had a couple of emails and advanced questions, but you will be able to ask questions also live, whether you're on BATC or on our Facebook page. So you can ask those questions from any time from now, and we'll be happy to read them. But first, I thought I would start with just a bit of an introduction about what it's all about. Now, you should have got an email, something like this, or a letter from Ofcom, if you are licensed, that is. If you have any level of Norfolk Amateur, have any level of Ofcom license, you will have got an email, something like this. I'm not sure how you're seeing that at home, but it'll be something like that anyway, that you will have got about the 1st or 2nd of March. And you may have wondered what that is all about. Some of you wrote to me and were asking for details. But in summary, really, it's all about EMF, or electromotive force, and the effects of the antenna not interference, but emissions that it could have, particularly on anybody else, not just you, because you're a licensee, you should know what you're doing, but you've got to start considering other people who might be near. So, for example, on a mobile antenna that you might have on your car, can someone else get near it? And how close could they be before they were injured from it? In your garden, you may have a long wire, which is quite innocently put up, but maybe the end of it is on a bit of a fence which borders onto a neighbour or onto a public footpath or something like that. So that's really what this is all about. And Ofcom have written to all organisations that transmit, and so that isn't just radio amateurs. That's including if you have a radio on a boat, for example, you'll have also got that because you'll have a licence for that. Even aircraft. There's a license which you'll have with Ofcom, and you'll have been written to with the same thing as that, or with the same sort of thing. Now, Ofcom themselves have got a lot of information on their website, and in fact, you can find it the quickest way is to go to ofcom.org.uk/EMF. I think we've got a slide for that, but don't worry too much about it, Tammy, if you can't find that easily. This is the caption. So this is the link that they would have put in their email to you. The problem with it is really, though, is that it's not specific to radio amateurs. As I said, it's to all radio users, from whether you're the BBC or ITV transmitting, or whether you've got a boat, or whether you're a radio amateur. But of course, the organisation that looks after radio amateurs is the Radio Society of Great Britain. And they've been working on this for some time. In fact, last year, you'll have seen in several issues of the Radcom, they were talking about this was going to come up. It shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody. And in fact, there's been a very good article. If you're a member of the RSGB, you will have seen this. This is from the March issue of Radcom. That's what it looks like on the front, if you want to have a look at it. And inside, there's a lot of information about this new license regulations for electromagnetic field, and they're on the back. So there's lots of information out there. But even if you're not a member of the RSGB, they've got a very, very good web page, which they're constantly updating and bringing up to date. And you can find that by this link here, and we will give you this again if you don't worry, if you haven't got a pen and paper handy, but it's rsgb.org/EMF. That's a very quick way of getting to it. There's lots and lots of information and resources, as I said, where they're going to be updating. What are we doing tonight? Well, tonight we're going to try and explain to you what it all means. But before we go over to the guys who are, I know, at home to talk to them about this, I want to just explain a couple of things which are very important. Firstly, the timelines. I know lots of you were worried when you got it. You wrote and you were desperate to sort of get everything done. Well, The fact is that at the moment it's still a consultation. This means that Ofcom haven't decided on all the rules and regulations, and it's open for anybody, including you, as someone who's a stakeholder and as someone who's involved with it. You can make a representation to Ofcom, and you need to do that by the 18th of April. So you've still got just over, 2 to 3 weeks to do that. More details again on that Ofcom website. Now, it won't be, whatever they decide from those representations and their own work, it won't become law or part of your license until the 18th of May. And until the 18th of May, we don't really know everything that it's going to have. It may be some of the figures will change, some of the allowances, limits or whatever. So I think one of the things, if we do nothing else tonight, but is to tell you not to worry about this and not to treat it as urgent, because until the 18th of May, you can't really act because it won't come onto your license. Now, from the 18th of May, when it is likely to be an extension or a revision of your Ofcom license, that's, remember, whether you're at foundation, intermediate or advanced, you will then have 6 months to complete basically a table and look at your antenna systems, whether that's on your mobile or on your car, and actually attach those details to your license in case anybody ever wants to see them. So you're going to have a full 6 months from the 18th of May. Now, for frequencies under 30 megs, it's even longer, and you'll have at least a year to be able to do that. And so, in fact, some of the tools and things that we show you tonight don't even work at those frequencies at the moment. And of course, 30 megs, that will cover 80 meters, 40 meters, and top band, of course, as well. So this is really what we're doing. We're here tonight with the EMC team and with Steve to try and tell you what this is all about. But we would urge you probably not to do anything just yet until everything has been finalised, until the online tools and everything become more stable, and until, of course, the 18th of May, when we actually find out exactly what those changes to our licence will be. I hope that's proved a reasonable introduction for you, and we're going to start tonight with Mike G8EEY. He's one of our EMC officers, and he's going to explain some of the technical aspects of this, and he's got some PowerPoint slides which we've got, and we're going to play them out as well. So I hope you're ready for that. Are you now, Tammy?
I am, yeah.
Jolly good. All right, so we're going to let's go over to Mike. Anyway, Mike, if you can speak, Mike, then we'll get you on the screen, and then we can bring you onto our...
Thank you, David.
Okay, yep, here we go. So here we are, Mike.
Hello, David. Thank you. Hope you can hear me okay.
We can.
Yes, that's good to hear. Well, I've been looking at this for a while, and I have to emphasise that you can't go straight ahead and get things going because we don't really know all the details. However, if we start with amateur radio and ICNIRP, as we're going to call it, and see what all this business is, this EIRP. It's what they're using to measure. Not entirely sure whether it's a good plan. It's a radiation from a theoretical isotropic antenna, which is difficult to produce, and in fact requires 3 antennas at 90-degree axes, and then you have to process the result to find out. What has started all this is an exposure graph that Ofcom have been using, based from ICNIRP. I don't know whether we can find that slide for the exposure graph. There we go. It's a bit complicated. It covers the fact that from 10 megahertz up to about 2 gigahertz, it uses one set of values, either volts per square meter or amps per square meter, the E and H field, or the overall power density. Below 10 megs, you find that power density is no longer relevant, and then you have to go over to the magnetic field strength, which is a very complicated thing to try and assess, and involves the near field zone of antennas below 10 megs. And unfortunately, if you're within the reactive field area, you affect the reading when you try and measure it. If we go on to the next slide in the PowerPoint, we'll now go for average power, peak envelope power, effective radiated power, and effective isotropic radiated power. Well, the average power is the power that you measure on a power meter connected to the transmitter output without modulation. This is on AM, low on SSB, of course. FM, you'll find that you'll get readings with or without modulation and will give you the same result. Peak envelope power at the transmitter output with modulation. With AM, SSB and ATV, peak envelope power is usually around 4 times the average power. So if you've got a 50 watt transmitter, that's 200 watts PEP. With FM, CW and digital modes, peak envelope power is the same as average power because there's no change in the amplitude of the RF envelope. Effective radiated power is effectively the antenna radiated from the antenna, and it's equal to the peak envelope power minus the cable loss and any other losses like SWR and ATU, AMU losses multiplied by the antenna gain. EIRP, the effective isotropic radiated power, is measured over the 3 axes and is equivalent to ERP times 1.64. That's dBi. Or EIRP equals ERP plus 2.15 decibels. Some commercial antennas have gain quoted as dBi, as you've probably noticed when you go out and buy one. Some antennas seem to be a little better performers than others, and then you look deeply and you find some are gain in dBd, gain related to a dipole, and others in dBi, gain related to the isotropic. In these cases, the ERP value from above needs further conversion if they're already in dBi. So, on to the next one then. The UK Amateur Radio Licence states the maximum power allowable for the various frequency bands and licence categories. In the past, this was originally defined as DC power input to the transmitter, literally power supply, current and voltage. This gave basically an average power, but this has been changed some time ago, and in the majority of cases, this power is now quoted as PEP. There are a few occasions in the licence where you'll find that there are power allowances in ERP and even EIRP in 1 or 2 occasions, but they are very specific. So generally, the licence regulation is 400 watts PEP downwards to whatever values are allowed by your licence conditions and the band involved. If in doubt, check your licence, because that's the only way you're really going to know what power you're allowed on each band. So now you may have a list of values for EIRP and all the radio and antenna combinations that you use. So on to the next bit. So you got your figure for your legal limit power amplifier, your low loss LDF whatever feeder, and your impressive multi-element Yagi. And ICNIRP says you need an armed barbed wire fence around you at a distance of 53 metres. Ooh, that's a bit unfortunate. Means you've got to have a very big property. Well, that may be true for commercial operators, but not really for amateur operators. New teeth would be useful there. There are a number of factors that are relevant, and they reduce the impact on exposure. Exposure is the critical factor. That's the real meaning. So the first thing to think about is the mode. What mode are you using? Well, JT65, then all of a sudden your measured power that you put all that effort into finding is down to 77%. Analog TV, then you're down to 65%. CW, then you're down to 40%. SSB, then you're down to 20%. Unfortunately, if you're running FM and digital, you're still at 100%. So now we have to think about, on the next slide, Exposure and operating technique. Well, ICNIRP involves average power above 10 megahertz because at the moment that is as low as we can effectively assess at this stage until they figure out quite how we're going to measure the electric and magnetic stimulant fields below 10 megahertz. And at the moment, they are suggesting we don't even bother because it's not that easy to work on. This is all measured and averaged at the moment over a 6-minute period, but under the 2020 regulations, that will be averaged over a 30-minute period. TX-RX ratio, just how much time do you transmit during a 30-minute period, assuming we're going with the 2020 regulations? Unless you don't care to listen for replies at all, then contesting is probably the maximum at 50% TX-RX ratio during an active period. A typical directed net of 10 participants could cut your transmitting time to 10% or even lower. So our operator from before, poor chap with the 53 meters exclusion, is actually using SSB on a 10-meter Yagi at 10 meters height for a 30-minute net with 9 other stations. And thus suddenly finds that he's actually got a compliance horizontal distance separation of 0, no meters at all, because of the amount of time of transmitting that he does at any one time. Next on our little list, what do we do now? Don't panic. As Corporal Jones said, the legislation is not be set in stone until the 18th of May, after which there is a 6-month period to assess your situation for compliance, if you're operating above 10 megahertz, and 12 months or maybe more if you're operating below 10 megahertz. Right, now, people have always been saying, oh, well, what I need now then is an EMF meter so I can measure this because I don't trust any of the calculators and all the rest of it. Well, I would say definitely not recommended. Anything available in the sub £1,000 area will have an operating range from 10 megahertz up or even 50 megahertz upwards. They will have a data memory, but they are not easy to use and not likely to produce the document-based compliance records that Ofcom require. I have one here. It's going to set you back the best part of £300 and is going to give you readings that you're going to have to grab and hold from multiple measuring points and then use that wonderful graph that we started off with. And I don't recommend that. That's way too complicated. So, the way forward. Calculators. There are 2 Excel-based calculators. Oh goody. They're in XLSX format, which means you've got to have a decent computer and some means of being able to deal with office-based Excel calculations. And there is one executable or executable calculator available, and they're all available online. The Excel versions are the Ofcom version. Currently, it's EMF calculator 0.1.2.xlxl. I wish they wouldn't call it that. Some definite funnies in it at the moment, but again, it's not set in stone. They are working on it to try and update it. There are errors in it. There are strange things happening in there. The other version is the RSGB version, which is currently EMF calculator 0.1.2.RSGB.9a.xlxx. These will all be available, I should imagine, from NARC, so that you don't have to remember those. And the executable one is based from the IARU-R1, which is nicely known as ICNIRP calc.exe by Thilo Coots, DL9KCE. I've been using all the calculators off and on. The German one by Thilo has the best technical coverage of cables and antennas, and in fact quotes measurements and gains from individual manufacturers and individual antennas, which makes life a lot simpler. We're hoping that the RSGB version will be getting similar things fitted in, and hopefully some of their problems in the RSGB calculator will be sorted. What we're finding is little things come up, and John Rogers from the RSGB, who is working on these calculators, is very happy to take any comments, suggestions, and bug fixes that are suggested at any time. I've been talking to him, and there are already some things that they've found which don't entirely make sense, which is why the second version was brought out. But an example from this is that I set up and measured my Land Rover with a 9-meter mast with a collinear on the top of it, running 50 watts on 2 meters. And it told me that I had a horizontal separation of 0. But unfortunately, it also told me that I got to stay 2 meters away from it. Because although it was 9 meters up, the calculator gets it wrong. It knows that it should only be 3.4 meters separation, but it can't cope the fact that the antenna's 9 meters off the ground. And it's little foibles like this that we are finding we're having to deal with, and this is why the calculators are not set in stone at this stage. They are being assessed and modified as people find these sort of things. I noticed with the calculation that Tony did for his setup, and I noticed that the same red box at the bottom of the calculator came up to say 2 meter separation from an antenna, where in fact you're nowhere within 2 meters of it, and there's no need to go 2 meters horizontal from it. So basically, don't panic, as they say. Back to you, David.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike. Now, I know for many of you that was pretty technical. It's technical for me as well, I have to tell you. But Mike, remember, is one of our EMC officers, and he's both offered to do the role and he's chosen to do the role by you just because he knows so much about it. And so it is quite a technical subject. But I'm going to put a warning out again. If you've joined us midway, and we've watched the numbers, and we've had about 10 or 20 people join us since we started the program. We want to just warn you here that there are a lot of things still about to change. As Mike says, they're still working on the spreadsheet. In fact, the RSGB spreadsheet, which should be more amateur friendly, is based exactly, as you'll notice the versions were the same, on the Ofcom one. So if the Ofcom one has bugs and errors, then obviously it's going to carry those through. The key thing, again, just for those who've joined us, is it won't be part of your license until the 18th of May, and then you will have at least 6 months to actually do this work. The reason we're doing it now, though, is to inform you what it's all about, but we really do advise you not to do anything yet, because the figures and certainly the tools and the calculators and things are going to change before then. Anyway, we've done that now, and our other EMC officer is Tony G0MQG, and he's been doing some of these tests actually with the calculator. We've got something to show you in a moment, but let's go over to Tony now and say good evening to Tony G0MQG. Hello, Tony.
Good evening.
Now,
First of all, I apologise in advance for any background noise. My neighbour is doing some DIY work, so there's not much I can do about it. So if you hear the sound of a drill in the background, I hope it doesn't disturb things too much.
All right, Tony. Well, that's fine. Thank you. And I think we're all now, after a year of this, I think we're all getting used to seeing people with from their homes and everything else, and with all the other things that could go on. And life goes on, of course, so we fully understand. But thanks for letting us know. Anyway, Tony, over to you. And we've got that slide of your calculator whenever you want it. Back to you.
If you can put the slide up, please. Right. Now I've got to switch over to a full-size one on my machine. Hope you can all still hear me. Perhaps you can just confirm that, David.
Well, we can hear you fine, Tony. I'm not sure how many people will be able to read every detail on there. We've one of the things we were doing just before the program started actually was trying to make this as clear as we possibly can. But obviously it's going through several digital processes. But so if you can talk us through it, Tony, and hopefully people at home can see it.
Yeah, I did do a printed copy, but it came out rather small. So if anyone wants me to email them a full-size copy, then they'll let me have their email address. I'll deal with that.
But it's important to say at this point, though, Tony, sorry to interrupt, but this is just an example, and this is based on one of your antenna, isn't it? This
is only a sample. Just out of curiosity, I did the calculation for my HF setup. The top left-hand corner, name, call sign, date that I done it, which was yesterday, station address, which you may or may not be able to read there.
We've taken that out just for your privacy, to be honest.
Yeah, okay, it doesn't bother me. It's on qrz.com, so it doesn't really matter. Make and model of the radio, which in my case is a Yaesu FD1000. And going down the page, you can see the picture of a radio, which is not my radio, incidentally. You can click in the little yellow box to the top right-hand corner of that one and enter the band, which I selected 20 meters. And just underneath the radio, you can select the mode, which is selected SSB. You can change it to FM, CW. I haven't tried data modes, but you can change that to whatever mode. Underneath that, transmitter power in watts. It will automatically enter it in dBW. Beside that, you may or may not be able to see that in my case, 200 watts, which is 23 dBW. Mode factor, it enters as 20%. That's 20%, as I understand it, as 20% of 6 minutes transmission. I beg your pardon, 40% is the transmit percentage, so it's 40% in 6 minutes, whatever that works out to. Underneath there, it sets the average power, which for SSB, as Mike said earlier, is quite low, and the average power is 16 watts. I don't see any means of changing it if you use a processor, but anyway. Maximum power, 200 watts, of course. You move along to the middle box, enter the cable type, which in my case is RG213. But when I downloaded this prior to putting my settings in, it defaulted to RG58. Then under that, cable length, other losses, which defaults to, and you have to put this in as a minus figure, minus 0.5 dB, but you can change it if you know what your other losses are. There goes that drill again. Then it will calculate average power into the antenna. Well, it's taking into account cable losses, of course. Peak power, again taking into account cable losses. And then the right-hand box, you can put in your aerial type. I haven't tried every possibility of aerials, but I put half-wave dipole. You can also enter Yagis. So let's say a 3-element Yagi you can put in. I also tried the 5-element one for 20 meters, just out of curiosity. I don't have HF Yagis up at my place. I just don't have any amount of real estate for that. But you can also put Wyndhams in, and as I said, Yagis. I haven't tried any others. Minimum antenna height in my case is 6 meters. And if you go down to the bottom, once you've done the calculation, the Ofcom separation distance is 3.4 meters, which leaves you with 2.6 meters above the. You need to be at least 2.6 meters tall for that to be a problem. So you can stand directly underneath the aerial, which if you look at the bottom center, if you scroll down if you need to, you see the horizontal separation is 0 because the aerial is 6 meters up and the separation distance is 3.4 meters.
Tony, if I could just interrupt you just for a second.
Yeah,
just to explain. So this is, for all of the complex stuff that I know we've covered in the last 30 minutes or so, for everybody at home,
Yeah.
this is the crucial thing. This is the distance that people must not be able to get near, closer than, to your antenna array. And really all of this is about the emissions and everything, but is about how close somebody can get. And I just want to explain that, because it's really going to end up with basically one figure, isn't it, Tony?
That's correct, yeah. And the compliance distance is quoted as being 3.4 metres. And in my particular case, nobody could get closer than 3.4 metres to my HF aerial unless they got a ladder out or something. My neighbours wouldn't be able to, because if you triangulate from directly under the aerial to my fence either side, and then take the distance from the top of the fence to the lowest point of my aerial, it would be greater than 3.4 metres. So I personally wouldn't have a problem with that one. I haven't done the calculations for other bands, but all you have to do is click in the yellow boxes, enter the mode, power levels, cable type, cable length, other losses if you know what they are, aerial type, minimum aerial height, and then the software will do the calculation for you. And all the boxes that are filled in white is where the software has done the calculation, like taking the transmitter linear power, for example, where I've put in as 200 watts, the maximum output power of an FT1000. It's automatically calculated as 23 dBW. That's about as much as I've got to say about it, really. The software is I got off the RSGB's website, and if you try and calculate it from the one on the RSGB's website, it's read only. But once you save it to your own computer, you can then enter your own settings. Oh, I found that a few days ago.
Right, so you sort of download it, don't you, and then run it under Excel. And by the way, if you're at home now watching and think I don't have Excel, I can tell you that we've tried between us. We've tried it on several things. I personally, I use a lot of Apple Macs, and Apple Macs comes with a program called Numbers, which is like their spreadsheet, and this program does work within that. So don't worry that you're going to have to go out and buy a copy of Excel or something for this. It will work with at least several spreadsheets.
If I can just add to that, David, I don't have Microsoft Office on this particular computer that I'm using at the moment. I use OpenOffice, because there's a free download basically.
Yes.
And it works fine with mine. And as I say, I don't have Microsoft Office.
Yeah.
Too expensive.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks very much, Tony. So there we are. That's the sort of thing. We'll come back to you, of course, later, because we're encouraging you at home now to ask questions. We've got a couple of questions that people have sent in advance, and I'll be going to the team to talk to them about in a moment. And I've seen a couple of other comments and things which we'll try and address as well. But if you've got a question, a specific question for the team, then this is a good time to do it. But just remember that one little caveat: you don't have to do anything urgently yet. So when you hear us talk about the little flaws and problems and foibles with some of the spreadsheets that are on there at the moment, they will be sorted, and hopefully all those tools will be available for you, ready for the 18th of May and onwards, in time to do all these things. But now I'm going to just go now to Steve G0KYA and introduce you this evening, Steve. Hello.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, how are you?
Good to see you. Thanks, Tony. Sorry, Steve. I'm going to bring your picture up, I think, any second now. I think Tammy can get you there. Lots of pictures, lots of sources coming in here. So I mean, you've seen Mike's presentation. Obviously, we've had several meetings about this now, and with Tony as well. Have you got anything from the antenna perspective just to share with everybody before we go to some of the questions?
Yeah, I think the first thing is don't panic. As I said, we haven't got to do anything right now, but this is really an awareness situation, just to try and understand what's going on. But you can do some work to actually do your calculations at the moment to work out your safe distances from the antennas. And you can start to think about the antennas you're using and whether they're going to cause you problems. For example, do your antennas, if you're using HF antennas, do they fix to a fence post, say, for example? Do they come down to a fence post? Because that could give you problems, not for you, but for your neighbours. And it could be that once you've worked out your separation distance, you've got to bear in mind that, if I mean, for example, mine with 100 watts on HF, I get a 3.4 meter separation distance that has got to be had. So it's no good having an aerial that's going to a fence post if your neighbours are going to be in the garden. You may have to think about, where else you can put it. You've got to think about the neighbours. You've got to think about the public. Other antennas you've got to consider, verticals, HF verticals. They could be a bit problematic, because if you've got, say, a 3-element Yagi, 60 feet or 40 feet or whatever, you've probably got no problem at all, because it's so sufficiently away from everyone that it's not going to cause a problem. But if you've got a vertical, basically they're fed at the bottom, you may have to, find a way of getting that 3.4 meters away from your neighbors as well as you. So really it's not so much about you and your situation, it's about your neighbors and the general public. So think about your garden right now. If you've got a public footpath running down the side of your house, that's going to be important that you consider that. Think about where your antennas actually go to. Other things, indoor antennas. I mean, in my book, Stealth Antennas, I was advocating putting things in the loft. Well, now you've got to start thinking about that, because if you've got, you're running something like a dipole in the loft, your separation distance on that might be 3.4 meters. Therefore, you're not going to be able to run 100 watts to a dipole in the loft, which is never a clever thing to do anyway. But that's the sort of thing you've got to start thinking about. When we do special event stations, it may be now that we've got to rope off the antenna so nobody can get closer to it. And it's things like this I think you can start thinking about. But the good news is that if you are a foundation license holder with a 10-watt limit, if you're running into zero gain antennas, basically, I think Mike will agree, you've not really got a problem. In fact, I was in on an early presentation with John at RSGB, and he basically said if you're running 10 watts, it's not an issue. You haven't got anything to do at all. So if you're a QRP operating, you're using, something like that, 5-watt CW rig, you really don't have to do anything at all, because you're not going to have any problems with it at all. If you are using linears, the problem does get a little bit more complex. For example, I did a quick check with the calculator and found at 100 watts I need to have a 3.4 meter extension or exclusion zone around the antenna. Put it up to 400 watts, it suddenly goes to 4.7 meters. So again, if you're running linears up to 400 watts or higher, which you shouldn't be really, you start your exclusion zone is going to be that much further away from the antenna. So I wouldn't start panicking right now, but at least start to think what you're doing. For example, in my back garden, I have a 132-foot in-fed half-wave antenna that comes off the shed. I'm going to have to move that to the other end of the shed to get my exclusion area or distance away from the neighbour's fence. And it's things like that. So again, don't panic. Do the calculations with the spreadsheet for now and get some figures. And then you can start to work out whether you're going to have to change anything in your particular situation, your antenna field, to make sure that you're compliant. And the trouble is, everyone is different. Everyone, we can't say, oh yes, you need to be X distance away from the antenna. You might have an EME station with a dish, which has got about 30 odd dB of gain on it. You might only run FM on 2 meters with 10 watts. No problem at all, probably. You've got no problem at all in terms of, your safe distance from the antenna. Is going to be, well, incalculable actually at the moment. So again, not a problem, but think about what you've got, think about what you're going to be doing, do some calculations with a spreadsheet for now, and start to think about whether you're going to have to start moving antennas around. If you haven't put any antennas up yet and you're thinking about it, again, keep them away from neighbors, keep them away from the house, keep them away from people, because this is the sort of thing that it could cause problems in the future. So that's really all I've got to say at the moment, David.
I think that. Thank you very much, Steve. I think that's really good advice. One thing I was thinking, just as you were saying it, then that probably the only time to really be thinking about this at this moment is if you are just about to think about putting up an antenna array or something like that, because it would make sense to at least start taking into consideration some of these regulations. as they are now, even though they may change for 18th of May when it comes in. And you could start, as you said, preparing, you could start listing out the cable that you're using and things like that. You know the sort of information that you're going to need to be able to fill in that calculator. Now, we've had several comments from people. I'm just going to read some of them here. Let me have a look. I mean, Ricardo says, for example, hope all the mobile phone operators will also have to comply. I mean, as far as we know, I believe all people who generate RF interference, or sorry, RF transmission, stroke interference, or anything like that, will have to comply with these. It's certainly not just aimed at radio amateurs. It's every organisation or person or people that transmit. Let me go through some of these questions now. Alan Scoggins, 2E0FWF, says, how do you get on with ground-mounted antennas like Hustlers? So I don't know if that's one for you, Steve, possibly?
Well, yeah, a ground-mounted Hustler antenna. We'll think of it as a quarter-wave vertical, because that's the easiest way to consider it. That actually is listed in the RSGB spreadsheet. So it is an antenna you can select. And again, if you do that, you'll probably come out with 100 watts, well, probably 50 watts in your case, but you'll come out with a distance of maybe 3 meters or so. So yes, that's what you've got to consider.
Okay, I don't know, anything else from Mike or Tony at this point?
No, I don't think so, no.
Okay, fine. I've got Bob Fuller, who's our shack owner there, of course, this week. What about arc electric welders? Surely they give off EMF. And I also saw Steve G3EVA commented on things like RF welding and things like that. Do you think they're going to be subject to some of these regulations? Do any of you know? Mike, I think
yes,
you may
definitely.
have your...
If they're not
Sorry.
adequately screened, then they will fall into those categories. Have I frozen again?
No, it's okay. You're back now. We couldn't hear you for a moment. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. My internet has gone away. I'm using hotspot at the moment.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
apologies if I come through broken.
That's okay.
We wonder where you went.
Yeah, it's the reliability of modern technology. Yes, anything that produces a radiated field, whether it's through faults or design, they will be covered. Even distance wireless charging, they are covered, even down at the low frequencies they work on. Anything that has a measurable field of more than the equivalent of 10 watts, they have to produce means of being compliant.
I mean, would it be fair to say, guys, that really we shouldn't be too surprised about this, because as part of EMC regulations for many, many years now, everybody who does create some RF radiation in some way has had to comply with certain regulations and limits and things for safety. It's just that this more clearly defines it, and in particular with respect to other users or other members of the public that might come near. Is that a fair assumption to make?
That's been in the license regulation since the word go. We've always been expected to deal with this and comply with it, but we've never been required to have paper proof at any time until now. And people are wanting proof, effectively. But we should always been aware of RF
Yes.
not getting too close. I mean,
I think
you're starting to say...
we're struggling a little bit with your internet at the
trans-
moment, Mike. Sorry, we might have to come back to you.
meter on a quarter wave on a vehicle.
Right.
If you finger on that, and you can easily get an RF burn.
Yes,
You can stick
absolutely.
your finger antenna.
It's not something we probably should be surprised about. In the interest of fairness and completeness, although it's a little bit off subject from what we're trying to do tonight, Rick M7GMT says, nothing in these new rules is good for the ham community, but the RSGB have rolled over and accepted them without a hint of a fight. Why was there zero resistance to the imposition of these rules from the RSGB? Well, I'm certainly not here to defend the RSGB, and I don't believe we've got any representative from the RSGB actually here to do it. The only thing I will say as an RSGB member, and I'm sure many of you are who are watching this, they've certainly talked about this for quite some time, and the right to representation it comes from to every amateur, and Ofcom now, and including in the letter that they sent everybody way back in early March, are inviting any representations to come from any amateurs, individuals, as I'm sure the RSGB have made representations as well. So if you have strong feelings about this, then do make your voice known to Ofcom. Okay, yeah, thank you, Tammy. Yeah, we have actually had some response from Noel G8GTZ, who's actually responding to Rick, and I'm going to read it out because although some of you are watching on BATC, some of you on Facebook, and you won't see it, so I'm going to say in the interest of balance and fairness, Noel says that, Rick, that was not the case. The RSGB responded to both Ofcom consultations with good rationale arguments. Unfortunately, less than 300 amateurs out of 80,000 in the UK responded. So you could say that we're getting what we deserve. That's Noel, and just says this is not just a UK thing. A lot of countries already have similar regulations. And in fact, that ICNIRP that we talk about, ICNIRP, the I stands for international. So these aren't just things that Ofcom have even created. This is something that internationally has been agreed. And I guess that where we might be able to influence something from the amateur radio community is if it affects our hobby really adversely. We probably wouldn't be able to write it off completely, but we might be able to get some of the limits or something changed specifically for the use and the frequencies and the bands that we use. David M0WEL says, will Ofcom RSGB be providing a standard format for submitting our analysis, and how will it be policed? My understanding of that is that the calculation that you'll make, probably using something like the Ofcom stroke RSGB tool or another one, is basically that you do it yourself, you print it out, you attach it to your license and keep it in your shack or your house, and have it there to present should anybody ever query it or come to you. Yeah. And I believe I don't
think you have to submit anything.
Yeah.
As you said, I think it's for you to keep with your license in your house, and you need to present it if anyone asks for it. But it's in your interest to make sure you are compliant. We talked about this the other day, and if your neighbour decides to create a merry hell and says that you could be causing him problems, if you can show you are compliant and you can wave a compliance sheet at him, and that's what you actually end up with, a sheet that says, you know, I can use this equipment as long as you are more than X meters away from the antenna, you know, that's it, no problem. But if you don't do this and you don't go through the process, then you're asking for trouble, really. And yeah. I agree. They're going through this in America as well. It is an international thing. It's not RSGB being picked on by Ofcom.
Yeah, or UK amateurs or anything like that. Wolfgang DL1B DL1BJV says we've had these regulations in force for many years now in DL or Germany. That's some of the questions that, and comments that we've had on BATC. I'm going to move over to Facebook now. We've got roughly equal number of people watching on each, about 60 people or so on each. And let me just try and find that. John 2E0TWQ says that he's used the calculator successfully on OpenOffice on his computer, and he's done some of the initial calculations with that. Steve G3EVA says, do we have to consider ourselves in these risk assessments? So any of you want to comment on that?
Well, only insofar as if you are operating your station indoors and you are within the exclusion zone, as it were, of the antenna, then yes, you do have to consider yourself. But ordinarily, the antennas are down the garden, so you can't operate the radio and be down the garden at the same time. But you have to consider other people in your household, definitely.
Yes. Anything, Mike or Tony, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, if I could just chip in. Somebody commented on mobile phones earlier. That was a question raised. I'm not sure how that would be implemented to mobile phones. I would suggest that it be down to the manufacturer, because the average person with a mobile phone probably wouldn't be aware of this kind of thing. They may be, but most likely not. And the other thing, somebody mentioned why the RSGB didn't contest this with Ofcom. Well, if you take an analogy, in my case, when I worked in a factory, and under health and safety regulations where I worked, you had to wear overalls and safety shoes. They're for your own benefit, and I would suggest that these regulations change in license conditions, I beg your pardon, are for your own benefit. And my particular setup, the VHF aerials are high enough to be for nobody to get within what the distance is likely to be, and I haven't worked it out yet for VHF, but I will do, of course. And the HF one, as I said earlier, my calculation came out to the same as yours, Steve, 3.4 metres. And unless people come into my garden, or if I operate my radio whilst being out in the back garden, there is a physical way you can do that. I'll explain it one day. I would still be greater than 3.4 metres from the lowest point of the aerial. I would have to be about 3 metres tall, which I'm not, of course,
Sure.
to be within the danger zone, if you want to call it that.
Yes.
Over to you, David.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Just the one, Roger G3LDI keeps writing here and says I'm ignoring him. I'm not ignoring you, Roger. You're telling us about a talk that we've got coming up later on. And at the end of this programme tonight, I will be telling people about where they'll be able to get more information. And that includes our own club. We're having a talk later on in the year, and also RSGB webinars and things like that. So I will be summarising. I'm not ignoring your comments there, but we've got quite a lot of comments coming in. I need to address those things. One final word I think we'll give to Rick M7GMT, who's come back on some of the comments made and says, I understand these regulations for commercial stations, but they are completely disproportionate for hobby experimenters. Contravening them could not only have your licence revoked, but you could be potentially open to prosecution or litigation, he says. Yeah, that's probably the regulation, but as I said, it does apply, as far as I know, Rick, and as far as we know, to every user, everybody who transmits in the air. Then potentially presents a hazard to the general public or anybody else in the area who's not deliberately transmitting, unlike an amateur who should already know what they're doing, and that's why they have a license, of course. Now I'm going to go to Facebook now and some of the comments on there. I've got a comment from Neil, G4HUN, says mag loops are often mounted near to the ground, so definitely a rope-off area, he says. Any of you good on mag loops? Steve, if I pick on you as our antenna guru tonight?
Yeah, I think mag loops appear in the Excel spreadsheet. I'll have to have a look. Yeah, I mean, again, generally mag loops are mounted very close to the ground, and so you'll probably end up with, where is it? I'm sure I saw.
Well, we're going to bring it on actually, Steve, because we have got a live
there we go.
computer, and we're going to bring that on now here. So for you and to help you with answering this question, and for everybody at home looking, this is a live website, spreadsheet. And if you have a look on the right-hand side, for everybody at home now who hasn't looked at this program before, it covers quite a lot of antennas, and that does include the ones you've just talking about. So back to you, Steve.
Yeah, a mag loop is in there. And if I put in 20 meters with, what should we say, SSB, I end up with 3.4 meters again. So that means you've got to keep 3.4 meters away from it. So yes, it is there. And that's the sort of distances that you'll get out of the calculator. It seems to come up with 3.4 meters for nearly whatever you do, actually, but there we go. So yeah, there you go. You've got to keep 3.4 meters away from it, or keep your neighbours and the general public 3.4 meters away from it, should I say.
Nigel 20NLK says, what if your centre feed to a Wyndham stops or slopes back to the fence? What if your centre feed to a Wyndham slopes back to the fence? Any of you like to take that?
Doesn't the feeder on a Wyndham radiate? Steve, perhaps you can answer that one?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I don't think they tend to think of different parts of the antenna radiating different amounts. It seems to be treated as the antenna. I think that's right, Mike, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. So it's
so you'll end up with
from any part.
Yeah, you'll end up with a figure that is a distance that you have to keep away from any part of the antenna, which struck me as a bit odd.
That's correct.
We all know that with a half-wave dipole, you've got the maximum current in the middle, so you've got maximum radiation coming from the middle. and a maximum electrical field at the ends. But so they just treat the whole antenna as, you know, as a single entity, I think, to give you separation
that's my
details.
impression.
Yeah.
Got another question here, or a statement from Chris G0DWV. He says, I've just done a calculation on my 20-metre setup. I'd have to be 8.1 metres tall, so easily compliant. LOL, he says. So at the moment, that sounds, Chris may be okay.
Well, the thing is that better equipped stations like Chris's, he's probably got no problem at all, because everything's mounted at height.
So it is one thing to think about. Sorry, Tony.
Yeah, one thing I had, I think I'm right in this. The electric field strength follows, I'm sure Michael answered this, correct me if I'm wrong, follows an inverse square law. So if the electric field, say, 1 metre from the aerial is, just for argument's sake, 10 volts per metre, 3 metres from the aerial, it's 1/9 of that. Am I right with that, Mike?
Certainly above 10 megs, yes. Below 10 megs, because you're in the reactive near field section, not necessarily.
Yeah, so you won't, unless you're running hundreds of kilowatts, you won't finish up having to be 100 metres away from your aerial.
Unlikely.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah,
you're more likely to get flashover.
We haven't seen anything for anything under 10 megahertz at the moment, have we? So if you're running 136 kilohertz, that's maybe a whole new ball game.
Then you're talking in terms of amps per meter squared in the magnetic field mode.
Yeah.
And that is definitely a new area. That's a difficult one to deal with.
Yeah, but if you're running HF in general and VHF, the calculators work for you, I think is the best way to put it. But if you're running VLF or anything like that, then you might have to wait a little while. And
as we've said many times, this is something that the RSGB are working on all the time, to use the main engine of the Ofcom spreadsheet, but actually make it more relevant for amateurs, which, as you could see from the shot that we showed you a moment ago live on there, it showed you that a lot of the amateur antennas, which wouldn't mean anything to the average user, things like a magnetic loop and things like that, are all going to be included on that. John Goldsmith, M6JAU, I think he's called. Presumably Wi-Fi and model radio control are too low power to matter? ? I would have thought, if I could just say a few words on this, I would think, as a small manufacturer myself as well, that they would have to comply in the normal EMC regulations and CE mark to be able to get a CE mark for a product. But do any of you have a call on that?
I think as long as it's under 10 watts EIRP, you're okay. And I don't think Wi-Fi is anywhere near 10 watts, is it? It's milliwatts, I would have thought. I don't know about radio controlled model aircraft. I don't think they're very high either.
I can't think there'd be 10 watts.
No.
No, they're certainly... No.
Andy M0NKR says, I know the rules at the moment don't include anything below 10 megs, but vertical with ground radials, I take it the distance will be from the radials, he says.
No, from the antenna.
Yeah, from the antenna, not the radials.
I would think.
Yeah. So you think it's going to be from the antenna, not the radials? Okay. Ken M0KGW says, are they going to judge our stations by its capabilities or what we actually use? For example, if I have a rig that does 100 watts but only use it on 50 watts, what's the situation with that? It's a very good question.
Basically, use the 50 watt figure. I mean, you could say, well, I could run 400 watts on every band I operate, but I certainly don't. You're basically dealing with your operational technique and what you do. It's a bit like noise at work regulations. It's not the peak value that counts above 10 megs. It's the actual average over a period of time, and that depends on how you operate. As I said earlier, if you only operate for 1 minute every hour, then you're not going to have a problem even if you ran 10 kilowatts. apart from breaking the law with the license regs.
Tony M0TDK says, I have a marine VHF antenna on my boat. I understand that the distances concerned apply to the general public, not the boat's crew. Where is the definition of crew is left floating, he says?
It only applies to the radio operator. It doesn't apply to the rest of the crew. Only applies to the licensed operator.
So it could affect the rest of the crew, but not the person who holds the license.
That's correct. I mean, if you look at a Royal Navy warship, if you ever get a chance to go on board, you'll find that there are antennas there which are deck mounted or superstructure mounted. There is always a big red circle round the base of any one of those as an exclusion zone.
Anything from either you, Tony or Steve? Anything else to add on that? Got plenty of questions coming, so don't worry.
No, I can't add to that. I've never been in the Navy.
No.
But it's an interesting thing to add, because as I said right at the beginning, and in case you joined us later on, this does apply to all operators or everybody who has an Ofcom license. I mean, one question I'm going to ask now, just in case, because I know a lot of people certainly come into this hobby from CB. So as far as I know, last time I looked at CB, at least, you could only allow 4 watts, but I don't know if you are allowed any more. So a question that hasn't been asked yet, but I'm guessing some people may ask, is will this apply to CB operators?
Yes.
Yes, it will. CB generally 4 watts FM, 12 watts PEP. So factor in some feeder losses, you probably get to under the 10 watts EIRP again. So it probably doesn't actually affect them unless they're starting to use linear amplifiers.
You might be able to do the calculation if the software will allow you to select 27 megahertz instead of 28. So you might be able to work out.
I think if you check 24 or 28 megs, I don't think you get much difference, to be honest.
No, I think you're probably right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lots of other questions, so we're going to get through as many as we can. Roger G3LDI says, what about open wire feeders?
Well, open wire feeder isn't supposed to radiate, is it? Because one cancels everything out. And it's
right.
About the antenna, not the feeder. So generally, I don't think that comes into it. Again, let's have a look at the Excel spreadsheet. Again, these are all questions that are going to be sorted out over the next few months. Here we are, cable type. You've got 300 ohm ladder, 400 ohm, 450 ohm ladder. So it is part of the feeder in the spreadsheet. I think they only really use that to work out the losses to the antenna. So it's not so much the radiation off the feeder as working out what your EIRP would be once it gets the antenna. So in other words, don't worry about it.
This is actually very fresh in my mind, because in the last 10 days, I and several friends of mine, we all run digipeaters, which are low power repeaters, which actually repeat APRS information. It's packet radio, basically. But we had to reapply for our licenses, and this was part of the thing that we had to do, and the calculator that we used to work it out, we had to put in the type of feeder, how long the feeder was. So we had to put in the type of cable. In my case, it was RG213, because it's a VHF frequency that we operate on, and how long to the error. So some of this, and this is not something new, this is something that we just did 10 days or so ago. So some of these things are things that people have had to think about. And of course, as amateurs and licensed amateurs, we should know that an antenna can provide gain. In other words, increase the amount of effective power from it. So that's why this is all what might seem quite a complex calculation, just to arrive at basically a safe distance that you can be from the antenna. Phil Hillier says mobile phones only use a few milliwatts, not 10 watts. So I guess that mobile phones aren't affected, although obviously you can be very, very close proximity to a mobile phone, much closer than you would say to an average aerial mast or cable, I guess. Paul Gunther says, what happens if you hold a license, have a mast and antennas, but don't transmit? how would the regulations come into force if you don't transmit?
Well, then you don't have a problem.
Well, you're not a transmitter.
Yeah. So this is not going to be some kind of policing then of the, if you've got the equipment, like somebody asked a few moments ago, that if you've got a radio that's capable of transmitting 100 watts, but you only run it at 50, it's down to you to declare an honest representation of what power that you transmit. So if, as Paul's question, really, if you're just receiving, even though you might have a transceiver connected to it, if you're just receiving, these regulations won't apply to you. Is that right?
Correct.
That's the way I see it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I should just say to everybody watching, and I know we've got more people watching tonight probably live than normal, and we will be recording this, by the way. We are recording it now, and this will be on our YouTube channel if you want to watch any of it back later. I must say a little disclaimer really, and say that none of us are experts on this particular matter. We're hopefully know quite a lot about things like EMC and antennas. That's why I brought this little team together. But we mustn't explain to you that we're not experts on this. In fact, nobody really is, because it's something that's continuously evolving. And I will say something again, because there are several people who are unhappy about this and the effect that it might have on the hobby. You know, as I think it was Noel GCZ pointed out, the RSGB last year did encourage everybody to respond and react to Ofcom, and it's not too late now. The consultation period to make any representations to Ofcom is the 18th of April. And I'm guessing that if something like a society like the RSGB represents, that's really just one voice. Even though it's a big voice, it's only one voice. Lots of more voices, if there are things that you're unhappy about, or things that you'd like Ofcom to consider changing, then you really do need to make your voice heard, and you have until the 18th of April. So it's very important to use that. And if you've already got a license, then you already have an account with Ofcom to be able to ask this. Alan G800 says, do we have to carry out these calculations out on every radio we own and every antenna on every band, he says?
Effectively, yes.
If you operate.
Yeah. If you've got 5 different HF radios and they all operate 100 watts, you're only going to do it once. You know, it's the power, the gain, and the feeder losses that they're interested in, not whether it's a Yaesu or an ICOM or whatever.
Right. So it's about the amount of power that you're transmitting. And Mike, you were going to say?
And the
yes. Yep. I mean, that is the basic thing. It's the same as with something like a mobile setup. You don't need to do it in every car park you park. You only need to do it generally, and then merely manage to keep your aerial unreachable whenever you're operating, or make sure that nobody goes anywhere near the antenna. But you only need to do it once for a given radio and antenna setup.
What about different bands on the same aerial with same radio? Say an HF radio everywhere between 10 megs and 30 megs.
Yes, you'd need to do it for each operating band and frequency.
Yeah, the cable losses would be different. The other one, is more a question I'd like to ask. Probably Steve is the best one to answer it. Is a lot of people's HF setup would be a radio in the shack, an ATU standing next to it or on top of it, RG213 to an aerial halfway down the garden, and therefore the SWR at the point where the feeder connects to the ATU probably wouldn't be 1-to-1. So then you may have feeder radiation. So would you have to take that in account?
If you look at the spreadsheet, it doesn't say anything about what SWR you're running into. Just the power from the antenna, the cable loss, and what sort of antenna it is.
It ignores any feeder radiation that may or may not be present.
Yeah.
I guess that could be, if you know what power you're transmitting into the antenna, and that's derived from that, and you can work out the losses, I guess, from the cable, and by definition the losses of RF in the cable must be radiating from the cable, surely.
Yeah, the calculation assumes, at least I would think it assumes, that the SWR on the feeder would be 1-to-1, which it may not be.
If you measure an SWR, if you measure the SWR and you find that you've got a significant SWR, then you can put that in as an additional loss. It's got the option there. It says additional losses.
Yeah,
For example, if you're going through a tuner, then you will have tuner losses, and you'll need to basically measure your forward power or power out after the ATU into the antenna and the feeder, and treat if you've got two feeders, which you can put in there.
Okay. We have got, I've never seen on NARC Live, this is our year's birthday, and I've never seen so many comments. We've got 26 waiting for us, which we haven't even looked at yet. So to be fair, I want to go to the two people who did submit us questions in advance by email, because I said that we will get through as many of the other questions as we can, as long as they're not duplicating things already been asked. So the first question we got actually was from Paul G3VPT. And he says, this is more of a general point, I guess. He says, I'm looking forward to the meeting and have a comment or two about mobile phone use. Several years ago, when I was playing about with transistor transmitter circuits, I noticed that half-watt RF at 28 megs could slowly heat up my finger. What about a watt or so from a mobile phone at a few hundred megahertz held against the ear, and the police with body-worn radios on similar frequencies? Will those users need to comply, Paul says. Anybody got a view on that, mate? Mike, I'm going to ask you, because you worked for a well-known public broadcaster, and you may have come across users of radios and things like that in your work there.
Yes, I mean, with body-worn transmitters, they're not running that much power. Same with mobile phones. Personally, I tend to use a handheld if I'm out and about, but I'll use a speaker mic plugged in. Basically, because it's less effort to try and hold a microphone up rather than holding a radio up. Shouldn't really be too much of a problem from that. I mean, you could then go into all the argument over sending your 7-year-old to school with their own mobile phone. So unfortunately, mobile phones only run milliwatts when they're close to a cell. If they're at extreme range, they can run up to a watt or two. And
I guess, though, it's a case, Mike, that we
long debates on that.
Well, I guess it's a case, though, that we haven't, as amateurs, haven't got to worry about this. It's the mobile phone manufacturers that have got to worry about compliance with that. We're not responsible, just because we're a licensed amateur, we're not going to be responsible for what our mobile phone gives out. However, we may have to consider what our handheld portable might give out. And that's where it really affects us. And not many people, I think, hold a handy to their ear, but they do hold it normally maybe in front of their face. So they might be 300 or 400 millimeters away, and maybe they have to consider that. I'm not aware of any very, very high power hand portables, but I don't know if any of you are, but 5 or 10 watts is the maximum I've seen on anything.
A lot of Chinese ones now are claiming to run 7 or 8 watts. Whether they actually do, I don't know. But a lot of the ones we see coming out of China now claim to run that kind of power. I personally can't comment on whether they actually do.
Okay.
Yes, but that'll be power out, not EIRP. The EIRP with a less than zero gain on the antenna. I mean, a rubber ducky doesn't have much gain at all. So your EIRP is definitely going to be below 10.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, no problem.
All right, thank you. Paul also sent this picture, and I think, Katami, if we could show this picture now. It says, this picture shows a VHF backpack from the 1980s, part of the Klansman range, 33 to 75 megs at 4 watts FM with the whip antenna. There's also a 20 watt amplifier that can be clipped onto the top of the radio. With the amplifier in place, the whip antenna cannot be fitted. The RF is then fed via a BNC socket to an external antenna. And Paul's question, slightly tongue-in-cheek, I guess, because it's not an amateur setup, but he said, was this done to keep the RF away from the operator, maybe? I don't know if any of you've got a thought on that. Maybe it was part of the design, in other words, of that radio.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
Because if your body is somewhere near the antenna, then you're going to affect how the antenna works. And the military are, and always have been, aware of things like that.
Yes. Okay, well, thanks for sending those questions and that photo as well, Paul. Very, very useful. Now, the other person who sent us something by email in advance, so again, I'd like us to address that for him, was Alec G3YOA, and says, reading through the guidance on EMF compliance and enforcement, it does not give any guidance on how to see if each amateur setup is within the regulations and how to avoid breaking the rules. Reading paragraph 6.8, for example, how do we calculate when using the transmitter casually or in a contest, or on what mode, SSB, FM or data? Any of you like to take that?
Well, I take it he hadn't seen the spreadsheet at that point. I don't know, because the spreadsheet definitely asks you what mode you're using. It doesn't say are you taking part in a contest, but certainly what mode, what band, and how much power are you running. And that's the information that you have to put in to work out whether you're compliant or not. So I agree. If you're in a contest and you're running 24 hours, that's going to be a different situation to if you're just having a Sunday morning chat. But I think you put the figures into the spreadsheet and see what compliance figures you come up with in terms of distance. That's it. Do you think then that you're really going to have to enter the worst case? So if you do only run, I don't know, 100 watts on a Sunday afternoon for a particular sked with a friend who lives somewhere else in the country, do you think that that's what you're really going to have to put into this? Well,
it does look that way. Yes, yeah. I think that's probably the safest way to deal with it. To put the worst case situation in.
Well, we hope that answers you, Alec.
That's all I can think.
Yes, we can't really know for sure, but I think the key thing from this is it's not necessarily the equipment that you've got, as we've mentioned before, and what it's capable of. It's what you're going to use it at. So if you do have a 100-watt transceiver, but you're only going to use it at 10 watts, then the 10 watts is what you should account for. Now, so I'm getting worried by the number of comments and questions that we've got. I'm going to address some of them. Quite a lot of people have asked actually about public events, and in particular, this club likes to do a public event called Radio by the Seaside on the North Norfolk coast there at West Runton every year, and several people have asked, and sort of almost a little mini chat that's happening on the BATC there, about how we would deal with this. So I'll just read a few of them. So, for example, Mike M0TVG said, what about Radio by the Seaside with the public are close by? Nev M0NFY says, I can see us having lots of fun when we have the next Radio by the Sea, a few dozen radios on a cliff top, he says. And several other people saying something like that. Jim, G3YLA will sell you a kite, M0HBL says, so it's a very good way of doing it. Height being, of course, a good way to maybe get rid of that problem with distance, which is what it's all about. Smart meters, I'm just trying to see here. Wolfgang DL1BJV comes back and says it's not only humans, but also animals, horses, cows, dogs, etc., which all should be considered. Very good point. Any other comments on things like, if any of you have got any thoughts about a public event, like let's take Radio by the Seaside, where we turn up in our cars, we set up various antennas. I guess that we're going to have to do the thinking and the planning for that and make sure that those areas are roped off.
I think you're right. I think that's exactly what we've got to do.
Certainly if the antennas are at a low height, then yes, you've got to do that. Rope them off. Or make sure that they're in an inaccessible area for the public.
Or run less power.
Yeah, okay.
Or run less power.
I'm trying to filter these questions. We have over 30 now that are waiting. So forgive me if I miss any. It's not deliberate, but I'm just going to try and summarise some of them that are asking a similar question. I want to go through something specific. Les G0DFC says, whoa, it keeps going off the screen. An inverted L 160 10 metre fed at ground level within 64.1 Ballon doesn't seem to be listed. I think, Les, I would guess that my colleagues will say the same thing. This is ongoing work. This is not a finished work. The RSGB calculator, though, the version of the spreadsheet that comes from Ofcom will be developed and will have these ones on it. I don't know if Tammy, if I put you on the spot here a little bit, but can we show that link to people, because I think it's important. Whether or not you're an RSGB member, the RSGB have done a lot of this work. And we're just going to show you a link at the bottom of the screen now. So especially if you're not an RSGB member and you may not be aware of this, if you want to know and look up further information and be linked to the latest calculator and everything else, just make a quick note of this very short URL, because that will be updated as the Ofcom calculator is updated. I'm sure the RSGB calculator will be updated, and all that information is freely available to you whether you're an RSGB member or not. And that's the link, rsgb.org/EMF. Sorry, Tony?
Yeah. I was going to say, perhaps we can put it on the club's websites. People can get it from there if they don't get it jotted down in time.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think a quick search will find it, but that's a very nice short URL that you can remember. It's rsgb.org/EMF. Going to get through some of these other questions if I can. Nigel says, what if you hold an intermediate or foundation license? It doesn't matter really, Nigel. I think I'm right in saying, it's just about how much you transmit. If you've got a foundation, you're only allowed to transmit up to 10 watts. So as Steve has said, in most cases, it shouldn't really apply to you. But of course, I'm sure it will be part of your license, as it will for intermediate and advanced users. And I'm sure as well that speaking from a club that does a lot of training in normal times, then I'm sure that we're going to be building this into our training to make sure that people know how to use something like this calculator. Robert Gaskell says, if you're using CW, which is on off, could you say that you're only transmitting for 50% of the time so that you can reduce your power by 50%?
Well, again, if you go to the spreadsheet, it says what is your transmit mode, and you get to choose from AFSK, analog TV, CW, digital, whatever, and that will determine what your transmit rate is, or your mode factor, I think is what they call it. So yes, you could argue that with CW, and in fact, that's exactly what they do put into the spreadsheet.
So that's why when one of you, I think it was Mike, in his initial piece going and talking about the technicalities with it, when he talked about FM, of course, it's 100%, isn't it? Because there's always a signal there. There's always a kind of carrier there, whereas on other modes, there's not a carrier all the time.
CW is actually 40%.
Yeah.
Right, 40%. Thank you very much, Mike. Mike Costello now writes G3YPP, and just to let anybody know who's got a boat, and I guess that included Tony earlier, and maybe some of you as well who are worried about your transmission levels on boat radios. The RYA, the Royal Yachting Association, has been just as involved as the RSGB and are publishing advice on their website. So if you are involved with, if you have a boat or you have a transmitter on a boat and things, then there looks like the RYA are going to be producing advice and giving advice specifically on the sort of antennas that you'd have on a boat. Steve G3VA says, will I need an exclusion zone around my car when transmitting mobile? That's a common question, I think, that a lot of people are probably thinking. So who'd like to take that?
You mean actually driving mobile?
Well, let's assume maybe driving mobile.
Because this is the query that I actually raised.
Oh, we've gone.
We're struggling, I'm afraid, Mike, with your internet. We heard that you said it's a problem. It's a query that you raised.
This is one that I raised with Ofcom, and I didn't really get a good response on that. If you're parked there. If you're parked mobile, then you need to keep your exclusions. As far as I'm aware, then actually driving, there shouldn't be a problem unless you've got somebody tailgating you forever and a day on your rear bumper. But as they say that if you're operating mobile and you move, because Ofcom, of course, say mobile means everything from something you pick up and carry the other side of the road to actually being in a car or on a bike or walking. You don't need to do compliance calculations for every situation where you're driving. But I haven't yet had a good response on the subject of while you're actually driving. I don't think they seem to understand that for some reason.
Okay. Well,
that's the other point to make again is that tonight is about awareness. We can't possibly answer every question because we don't know the answers. I think RSGB are going to end up with a massive, great big FAQ on their website, which covers an awful lot of these topics in due course. But tonight we can't answer some of these questions.
No, we have always said, and I'll say it again for everybody joining in. We're not experts at this. People like John Rogers at the RSGB have done a lot more work than us than us on this. And someone just put on there, just to help reinforce for those of you who have joined us recently, Tony M0TDK says, have we forgotten David's opening comments about not panicking? And that is the case still. So our advice as a club to you is not to do anything really yet, except maybe if you're thinking about putting some antennas up in the next couple of months, it might be an idea to either wait or at least bear the sort of thing that's been published in mind now before you do it, because it would be sensible to design out any problems rather than have them. But for everybody else, I think it's very important. They're going to be wait till 18th of May at least, when much more will be available. And I'll tell you before the end of the show tonight as well, where there's a couple of other programs and webinars and things that will be covering a lot of this from people who know a lot more and will know a lot more, of course, after time has gone by. There's so many questions. I'm really struggling to keep all of these sort of things here. People are saying, do you have to fire up your radios to do calculations? No, just print out what you do. That's your evidence. You know, if you've put the figures in right, you'll be able to print out that spreadsheet type of picture that you saw, clip that with your license, and that's what we believe you'll need to prove that you've done some work on this. Tony G4EYE, do you think that warning signs and disclaimers will need to be used in future on vehicles and home stations, he says?
Only on home stations, if there is a possibility that somebody is going to become or get closer than the exclusion zone, which they shouldn't be able to, because if you've made it compliant, then they shouldn't be able to. So I think from a home perspective, no, you shouldn't have to have emergency or warning signs. Base state or mobile stations, I'm not sure. That's a good question.
Okay, so there's a TBA on several of these things. Paul McGee, in a nutshell, he says, I wanted to get my full license, but I've only got a loft to have my antennas, and I guess I might as well stay an intermediate, because if I use over 50 watts, I'm going to run into trouble with houses either side of me. I run a mag loop and a long wire. I don't know if any of you have any general advice on anybody like that. I'd hate to think that this puts anybody off for going for their full license, but any of you have any thoughts on that?
Well, as I said, in my book, Stealth Antennas, I was telling people that you can put antennas in the loft, but keep the power down. And that was really, from a safety perspective, without actually saying it was from a safety, well, it was saying it was from a safety perspective, but that was before we had the ICNIRP regulations coming in. So, yeah, if you've got a mag loop in the loft, I wouldn't recommend running more than 50 watts anyway, full stop. So, yeah, I think, I wouldn't say don't go for your full license, because you get a lot more with a full license than just an increase in power, of course.
Yes, you can work on different modes and things.
You can operate abroad. You can operate and get a special event station license, which you can't do if you haven't got a full license. So it's not just about a power increase. No.
I mean, I've got another comment from Peter Bishop, who just says, I don't think I'll bother to get my intermediate now. I wouldn't feel like that, honestly. I know this may have seemed overwhelming tonight. I'm surprised by the number of comments and things that we've got, and we've still got quite a lot to get through. But it really is a question of, A, don't panic. And in many cases, we suspect, and some of us have done some work on this already, it won't affect anything you've got. It's just a question of justifying it, really, and noting that you've considered all these things, you've made a note of them, and you've clipped them to your license, and you've got them there just to prove that. In rare occasions, and maybe when you're out and about, instead of just putting an antenna up and hoping that the public don't get nearby, maybe you'll have to rope it off. But probably that's something we should have been doing anyway. After all, what's the basis of this is safety, and is health and safety for people. And I know many of us will feel that health and safety is an overdone subject nowadays, maybe. But after all, we are looking at the effect of health. If someone got an RF burn in particular, as I know we said on our meeting the other day, it's extremely unpleasant, unlike a normal electrical shock or anything like that. And of course, it could be even more dangerous than just being unpleasant. So this is what this is really all about. And it isn't just Britain, and it certainly isn't just radio amateurs. This is an international thing that, as the world, I guess, becomes more wireless as well, that we need to consider these sorts of things. Tom Miller says, does a brick wall affect the safe distance from the antenna? Very good question. Should the possibility of a person seated up to the brick wall mean that an antenna within 3.4 metres of them would need to be still moved away, he says. So it's the shielding effect of a brick wall, really.
You would. A brick wall is not going to stop RF.
Okay.
Otherwise, it'd be No point in.
No, you're not really going to get.
Okay, I think we lost a little bit of that, Mike, but basically I heard in my earpiece more of what you said, I think, and basically that a brick wall is not going to generally stop RF, so you should still consider it as if the brick wall wasn't there, because it will pass
Correct.
the RF at a more...
That's correct.
I guess it might attenuate it a little bit, but it not to a negligible effect, really. Kev Min says, I suggest the way ahead is to do a worst case, brackets FM at highest power, analysis for each band in use, ensure safe separation, and then any other mode will comply. That's a suggestion from Kev. Scott Ladderman says, these rules could be an advantage when applying for planning permission, as we could argue that the antennas need to be high for safety. Good point. Maybe the planners might agree with that, Scott. Michael Lane says, surely it does not apply to foundation licenses if they have had... surely it does apply to foundation licenses if they have aerials with substantial gain. Steve?
Correct, yes. Absolutely.
As I did mention a little while ago, antennas can have gain, in other words, give you more of an emission than that's coming out of the back of your transmitter. So that is something to bear in mind. So yes, we can't say that it just doesn't apply to foundation licenses if they've got a very high gain area.
I didn't say that. I said if you're running into unity gain antennas, it doesn't apply to foundation holders. But if you've got Yagis, that has to be taken into account.
Right. Okay.
And they're in the software.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got another question here. We've almost got to the bottom of our thread here, I think. I'm missing some out, which are just copying, or just very similar questions to others. I hope you don't mind me doing that, because it's 9:20, and I think we've got to start thinking about wrapping up fairly soon. Paul Holman said, what if you park up in a car, then put a rope around the car to keep people away? Will you have to pay for cars to have more than one parking space? I don't know whether that's tongue-in-cheek slightly, but that's something to think about. But it certainly, I think... we may be able to have something like a radio by the seesaw this year, and it's something that maybe we can at least think about when we're there, even if the regulations haven't come in force then, to think about when we set up an antenna that's portable. We'll have to think about those around us and not just ourselves. Have we got any more comments here, Tammy, I think that are different to anything else? Wolfgang DL1 BJV says, compulsory for every transmission with more than 10 watts EIRP. Radio amateurs can calculate and forward the results to our ETZA, which is Ofcom, free of charge. All others, taxis, etc., have to get the calculation done, which is not free of charge. Again, it's a very good point. I know that a lot of people from different countries watch this, and although Ofcom is the UK's regulator for transmissions and things like that, in your own country, I'm sure you'll have a similar body, just like Wolfgang says, the one in Germany, and I'm sure we have other people in America. It's the FCC and other regulatory authorities. They'll have a slightly different take on it, maybe. But the ICNIRP is an international standard, which I guess most of these the transmitter bodies will be asking their amateurs to think about a similar thing. Okay, well, I've got Tony M0TDK says that no, that's not the case the RAA is giving. So I'm not quite sure about that, Tony. I'm not.
It's to do with the boats.
With the boats and marine. So I'm sorry. We're not trying to give any advice here. We're just trying to share with you what we think there. Jim G3YLA has said a very positive note to think about as well. That you can do a great deal with 5 watts. He says, fear not, which is a very good point. We are trying to be positive tonight, and we're not trying to worry you. Let's see what else we've got here. Leave the bunnies alone. I don't know. We're going to have to miss some of these things. Are mag loops used outside, designed for mounting at low levels? Mike M0TVG asks.
Okay, right. Technical question. A mag loop will work at maybe 2 loop diameters above the ground. Don't really want to go much less than that. So they are. If they're mounted vertically, you can use them at low levels. Absolutely. But usually about 2 loop diameters is the minimum you want to go. And in fact, from a safety point of view, with a mag loop, you really want to get it so nobody can touch it. So maybe 3 meters above the ground from a safety point of view. Because having grabbed hold of a mag loop with 100 watts in it, you don't want to do that very often. I can tell you, it hurts.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the voltage across the capacitor in the loop can be several kV.
Yeah, massive.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for tonight. We've all probably exposed ourselves to being asked all sorts of questions. We have already explained that we're not experts on this. In fact, it's quite new to us, as it is new to nearly everybody, I guess. But you'd be very sporting to sit there and take these questions, and we're very, very grateful for you doing that tonight. So I'd just like to say once again to thank you to Steve G0KY, Tony G0MQG, and Mike G8EY. Thank you very much for all the advice and things you've given tonight. But I think to finish on, we should just remind everybody again, this isn't cast in stone yet. If you want to represent, if you feel strongly about something to do with this, you should make a representation to Ofcom by the 18th of April. And remember that anything that is decided on will not become part of your license until at least the 18th of May. And then from then you will have 6 months to do something with this information. But once again, to Tony, Steve and Mike, thank you very much indeed for tonight.
And just one last thing. I think John Rogers is giving a talk on this after the RSGB AGM.
That's right. Actually, Steve, you're right. And I've got the dates in front of me here, and I was just going to wrap up by sort of saying those as well. But I want to just thank you guys very much indeed for tonight, because you've really put yourselves in the firing line. Thank you.
Okay. As Clive Dunn said, don't panic.
Don't panic. That's right. But just be aware. All right. Thank you very much. Just like to then tell you that those talks, as Steve mentioned, quite right, that's the next thing that you can probably find out some really good information about this. There is going to be a talk on the just straight after the RSGB's annual general meeting on Saturday the 24th of April. I think it's going to be 2 o'clock, I believe, something like that, round about that time anyway, after the main AGM event. Yes. John Rogers, who's in the EMC committee and on the board of the RSGB, he's going to be giving a talk and a webinar in that. In fact, he will be able to ask questions there. He'll also be doing another webinar on the 8th of July 2021, which is the RSGB Tonight at 8 webinar, which actually Tammy and I host from here. And John will be talking then, and you'll be able to ask questions. And of course, by the 8th of July, then this will be ratified and we'll know exactly what things will be. And I'm sure that tools and things will be available and much more stable. And also, Roger G3LDI has told me, he's our program secretary, and he has booked Ian GM3 SEK for a talk on this very subject for NARC on the 4th of August. And the only other thing I would just like to say to everybody at home now, if you didn't get an email or a letter from Ofcom, I think you need to think about why, if you have got a license or you think you've got a license and you haven't validated it recently, please go on and do it. You could lose your license and your call sign if you don't. You have to do it every 5 years. And all it means is that you have to go onto the Ofcom website and sign in. If you've forgotten your password, they're very good, they're very helpful, and they'll give you a password. Sign in, validate your information, say it's exactly, everything is exactly the same, your address and everything else, and that will then clear you for another 5 years. Personally, I think about doing it once every year or two, because it doesn't matter how many times you do it, as long as it's once every 5 years. And if you don't, you could lose it. And of course, you won't get information on things like this. So use it or lose it, as they say. Do that. But that is about it for NARC Live tonight. Once again, I'd like to thank very much the guys, Steve, to Tony and to Mike, for putting themselves up for this tonight, because none of us are experts on this subject, but we've tried to inform you and help you. And the most important message from it, of course, is don't panic and just sit and wait and watch what happens from there. Don't forget that link as well for the rsgb.org/EMF. rsgb.org/EMF. You keep an eye on that, bookmark it, and keep going back to it, because as the calculators and things improve and as more information becomes available, I know they'll be keeping that up to date. But that is it for tonight's NARC Live. Just to remind you what's happening on the club next week. GB2RS, we of course have got on Sunday at 7 o'clock. On Monday, the 29th of March, the Monday Night Net on GB3MB with the subject of favourite comic books and comic book characters. And at 8:30, we've got the 80-metre CW net. And then here, next Wednesday on NARC Live from 7:30, our special guest will be Peter Waters, G3OJV. We'll be finding out what he did, how he started in the hobby, and of course, if you missed it earlier, Peter Waters and Stanton. It was one of his companies. We'll be finding out what he thinks of the hobby now and why did he move his company from Hockley in Essex down to Portsmouth. I'll be asking him that and lots of other questions. And you'll be able to do it as well because he'll be here live. You'll be able to ask him questions yourself as well. So send us your news, your details, and if you've got any shacks that you want to be published, now's the time to do it. We've only got a couple left. But thanks for a packed evening on our birthday as well. Thank you very much to Tammy M0TC. And goodbye to you.
Oh, I've got to say goodbye now.
You can say goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye from me, David G7URP. We're going to go in for a drink of a coffee or something like that.
Oh, we've got
as
that
well.
Cake to eat.
Oh, and they've got the cake.
Yeah.
Got coffee and cake. All right, don't worry. It's lovely to you to join us, and we hope you've enjoyed the programme. We'll see you again next week on NARC Live at 7:30. From me and from Tammy. Good night.